Welcome to today's episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Gaughan from Village of Gurnee PD in Illinois, 26 years total in law enforcement, is also retired U.S. Army, and wellness is something that is a huge priority for their agency. Really looking forward to having Chief Gaughan on the show today. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Paige. Thanks for having me.
Of course. I'm really looking forward to it. One of the things that stuck out when you and I talked offline that I thought was so funny and worth mentioning is that you said that you got hired when you were 20 years old and you couldn't even carry a gun yet.
That's true. I when I was younger, I wasn't really a straight A student. I wasn't really on a straight and narrow path, but I had a few adults at that time that kind of were looking out for me and that were guiding me in the right direction. One of them happened to be a chief of police, and he saw something in me, and he wanted to give me a chance. He gave me a chance at 20 years old. So in the state of Illinois, most people don't get hired at 20 just for liability reasons, maturity reasons, having life experience. But he gave me a chance, hired me at 20. And so for the first month or so, I was riding around with a lieutenant. Couldn't carry a gun. The uniform was too big. It looked like I was wearing my dad's uniform. And I went to the police academy, and I turned 21 a week before I graduated, which is probably as early as you can be.
Wow, I loved that story. I thought that that was so funny. But I'm curious, having someone who you said kind of saw something in you, was believed in you and gave you a chance that early, did that influence, the way that you view mentorship? And is that something that kind of stuck with you long term, where you then also wanted to give back to others in that same way that they did for you?
It does. It really has me think. In the last several years, we've sat through hundreds of interviews with young adults wanting to be police officers, and I try to take each one into perspective and what really, if they're there with their heart, even if they made mistakes in the past. Some things everyone is human, so we can look beyond some things. And I think about that in my story and how it resonates, and I'm hoping that someday that someone else will come back and say, you know what, that what you guys did helped me out too. So.
Yeah, I've shared this before on the podcast, but I made a lot of bad decisions when I was younger. I had a hard upbringing, and I always had said that I wished I had someone who did that for me. I wish that there was someone who showed me that there was another path, a better path, a healthier path. I think when and I don't know your, life experience before law enforcement, but at least for me, my surroundings only showed me really one way. Like I only had the influence of, and I had a stepdad who took care of me, and he did give me a good life, and he, tried his best to care for me. But, I saw my dad going to prison and drug use from both of my parents. And I had a lot of people just telling me I was going to end up like them. And I think that I was told that enough that I just believed it. And I didn't know that there was another option. And so I love that you had someone who showed you really early in your life that you could choose a better path for yourself. And I really wish that I had someone like that. And so I think that both of us maybe have different fuels, but I almost have a fuel to try to set that example for other people because I didn't have it, So yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. I'm curious, starting so young, do you think that law enforcement today is harder than it ever has been? Or do you feel like there's different kinds of hard? I've had this conversation before where some people feel like it's harder today than it was back then. And other people think that it's just different.
Yeah, I think it's just progressing. I don't know if it's harder. I mean, it might be harder for someone like me or someone that's been on the job over 20 years, just because it feels so different.
Mm.
But when we came out of COVID and all the civil unrest, those officers, that's what they knew coming into that. So they didn't see policing before COVID. They didn't see policing before civil unrest. Illinois went through a lot of law changes during that time, a lot of different changes, and they didn't see any of that. So the normal for them was day one starting in 23, where in 23, 24, it was completely different policing for people that were 15, 20 years on.
Yeah.
So I think it really is the perspective on where you started in your career, and for some of us, I think that it's just changing. Um, but yeah, I think the newer officers have a little bit of advantage because where they're starting with body cams, with GPSs on their cars, all of that stuff, that technology was introduced to us, and there's a lot of pushback because, as you know, talking to a lot of chiefs, that police officers don't like change. They're very hesitant to change, whether it's themselves or things around them. So when people say, "Hey, now you got to wear a body cam," there was a lot of pushback and hesitation. But now it's second nature. These guys get out of the academy, they put their body cam on, they go out. There's no complaining about that. No complaining about GPS on cars, about de-escalation. So it's the generations, I think.
Yeah. There's a couple things in there that you said that I wanted to point out. One, I think that change gets a bad rep. I think that when we say change, automatically our brain goes to negative instead of understanding that some change is really positive. Some change can be really good. And I would argue that we always want to be changing and evolving and growing and bettering ourselves, and I hope that I'm not the same person that I was yesterday. I hope that I'm like 1% better each day, the 1% rule. And so I think when we say the word change, you're right. There's kind of this knee jerk reaction of like, ooh, like I don't like that's scary. I don't know what that looks like. I want to stay in my comfort bubble a little bit. But once you get that first step and you're able to step out of that comfortability a little bit, then it eventually does become something that is more consistent and more second nature. And that first step is the hardest for
Yeah.
everything, even wellness. We talk about wellness and, it's hard for people to maybe take that initial step into, doing something different or better for themselves because there is some unknown or, like maybe a little bit of fear about, maybe being new or sucking at something or whatever that looks like. So that first step, I think, is always the hardest.
I agree. And sometimes it's good for leaders to almost challenge the one that is giving the most pushback,
Mhm.
that make them the one that does the pilot program. Because if you can get their buy-in, then you can get everyone else's buy-in.
It's so funny you said that. I've had many moments like this, but there's one that stuck out. I was doing a briefing and I had leadership come up to me and they're like, "Hey, we're going to sit down on this one." They let me go for almost all the other briefings. And this particular one, they were like, we're going to sit in with you. And I was like, okay, why? What's going on? And they were like, there's one particular guy in the back and he's not going to be about this. And we just want to make sure that he's respectful or something like that. And I was like, okay, sure. And I just did everything like normal. And at the end, that same person came up to me and was like, hey, like asking me questions, super engaged. And I think sometimes it's, how can we, because I've done this before. I'm like, oh, that person's not going to be into it or they're not going to do it or whatever. And I think we all have kind of like our limited thought processes on things, but it's also like, how can we approach each individual and understand what's going to make each person tick? What's going to make each person excited? How can you deliver things in a way that engages everyone on different levels? And you're right. If you can get that one person that's always a naysayer to be a champion for it, then you've won.
Right. Absolutely.
So COVID was also kind of that time for you guys where you really started diving into the wellness space and really started, adding things to your programming and trying to put an emphasis on it. Can you give us a little bit of insight into, why that was important for you, what you guys were seeing, and maybe some of those first steps that you took to prioritize wellness at that time?
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah, I think Illinois might have got hit. I mean, each state in every area got hit different ways with COVID, civil unrest. During that time, we were going through, like I said, some law changes that were not all positive in policing. Some of them went through, some of them didn't go through. Some were positive, and had good outcomes. But I think that drove a lot of officers for either to move out of state or for early retirement. And so we saw a significant drop in employment at the Gurnee Police Department and all the surrounding areas. So we probably lost 30 guys in just a couple of years. And we ended up having to hire over 40 in 3 years.
Wow.
So that's a significant portion of our department when you're hiring 40 new officers. So we really had to kind of step back and say, all right, what are we doing that is losing officers, and what can we do to not only get officers but keep them here for a long time? So that's kind of when we started with the wellness stuff. We, you know, kind of the big difference between us and the fire department. And I jokingly say this to the fire department too. We have a good relationship, but fire department, they go somewhere. They go to a call that they know where they're going. The call comes out, the house is on fire, somebody needs medical assistance. They know they know what the call is. They go in a team. They go in a big vehicle with a group of guys, and they go with the supervisor. And then when they're done, they get to come back and they get to decompress in their lunchroom or wherever they're at. Where an officer goes to a call, he goes to a call by himself. He goes to a call that he doesn't know what it's going to be, and he doesn't have a supervisor. And then when he's done with that call, he goes to another one. So, taking that from one thing to another, we really need to step back. And we know that, the fire department, they have time to relax between calls. They have they sit in their living room with their lazy boys or whatever they have going on. And so really, we kind of wanted to take a little bit of that. So we made a wellness room. We have a place in our police department that you walk in. It looks completely different than the rest of it. You wouldn't even think you're in a police department if that's the first room you walked in. It has a fireplace. It has lazy boy furniture. It has massage chair. It has all types of things. Basically, you go in there and it's like a calming atmosphere. And employees, before, we didn't want to see officers sitting at the station. We wanted them out on the road. Now we give them an opportunity to come in, decompress, go in the wellness room for a little bit. It's a wonderful calming area that we have, and I'm not doing it justice with my description, but they go in there. It's used all the time. So that was kind of like the first step, and we keep building on that. I think recently we just had a scout troop here, and they were adding to it as part of their Eagle Scout project. So it was interesting to have the community involved in that also. But we've moved from there to saunas in our locker rooms. So after they're done working out, we implemented, like a lot of places, the mental health therapist will come in and she'll sit down with the officers at least an hour once a year. And so our officers are getting reintroduced to that the last couple of years. We've went through and we hired a wellness coordinator for all of our wellness stuff, a comfort dog for the police department. We really wanted to make sure that their wellness, their mental health, where years ago, nobody really cared about that suck it up, drive on type of attitude, same that we had in the military, has changed because you want to keep the officers. And the newer generation, they look for that. We've actually had people sit in the interviews, they're 21 years old, and they say, what is your wellness program like? And so you never would have heard that before if it was 5-6 years ago, and we're hearing that now. So we have, we only have little things, and we're trying to bring in more. We have wellness apps. We have people come in and give speeches and talks, and we'll bring the families in, and they do like a 4-hour presentation for the families as far as resilience and taking care of yourself and how to look out for your significant other that is employed here. So it's not the best thing, but we're trying to grow it to be something good. And no matter what you do, I don't think you'll always have like a total robust wellness program that encompasses everything for everybody. But you got to do your best to get them in the door and then to keep them healthy. I think that's probably one of the biggest things that we've all been missing in law enforcement for years.
There's a few things that I really appreciated that you said. One is the why. And you mentioned this a couple times. You're like, we want to keep people here and we want them to be healthier and happier. And what can we do in order to achieve that? And how can we do that proactively? So I appreciate that you kind of circled back to the mission and the why, which was the people within the organization and their wellness. I also appreciate the mentality of, because I'm sure what you guys are doing is great. And there are a lot of agencies that still don't have anything yet, but I appreciate the mentality of like, how can we continue to grow and how can we continue to do better? And I don't believe that it's a destination. I think that as times change, as your personnel change, needs are going to change. And I think that having that mentality of like, hey, how can we continue to ask ourselves, how can we do better, allows you that opportunity to evolve and grow and best serve the people within your organization. So I wanted to kind of mention that, but there's also a couple of things you didn't mention that I want to circle back to that you had told me offline and I thought were really cool. So you guys have a really unique apprenticeship program, and you said that some of the things you're doing, you are one of, if not the only agencies that is doing some of the things that you guys are doing. So can you tell us a little bit about your apprenticeship program?
Sure. So I'm pretty excited about this one. We started it about a year ago. Our dispatch consolidated to a countywide dispatch center. So that gave us an opportunity to, we always like to make sure that the customer service we provide to the residents is, we want the face-to-face. We don't want the phone calls for reports. We want people to actually greet them in the lobby. We don't want to have a closed-off police department. So since we got rid of our dispatch center, we had to come up with a different way. And so we partnered with our community college, the College of Lake County, and now they have apprenticeship programs, but they didn't have a specific law enforcement apprenticeship program. And although places do, some will have like a 3-month apprenticeship program or a 3-month internship program. Really what makes this different is that the collaboration between our police department and the college, we actually go through. So the first thing we do is we interviewed about 60 different kids from local high schools that were getting ready to graduate. Out of those kids, we picked out 7 of them. The 7 of them we did background checks on. They want to be police officers. They're going to be going to that community college for criminal justice. And we partnered with the college. So we actually got to pick their criminal justice classes. So we went through with their curriculum instructor and went through and said, all right, we want them to have these classes first and then followed by these classes. And really, we got to pick their education. Mm. We took those 7 kids, 18 years old, young adults. We hired them full time. So we pay them a full-time salary, but they only have to be here 32 hours a week. We pay them 8 hours to stay at home and study. And then they go to class full-time, taking those classes that we picked out. While they're here at the police department, they are interacting with their officers. They are interacting with the public instead of having their phones in their hand. They are actually at the front when people are at their worst time, because they're a victim of some crime, or somebody wants to come in and talk about something, they're greeting them. So they're actually having that interaction that they're not getting other places. They're able to shadow each department, each division within the police department. And then ultimately, the goal is they're here for 2 years, almost 3. At the end of that, they'll have their associate's degree that we paid for. So while they're going to college, we're paying them full-time salary here. We're paying their college tuition. They have to keep a C or better to keep their employment, which no other place does that either. So you C or better, you don't have a job. Mm. And then once they get their associate's degree, it's about the same time they turn 21. Now we're able to skip past them taking the testing process. No longer that big hurdle of, where they're going to land on the list. They could land number 1, they could land number 30 or 50. Now we're able to bypass that. Our civil service has allowed us to bypass that process, and we can hire them directly, basically like a lateral. So what that gives us is basically a farm team. Now you have a kid that has spent the last 3 years here. We've vested in them. They are investing in us. They know our policies. They know our procedures. Really, we're starting them younger with the wellness stuff instead of really, I think the biggest part of it is that a new officer comes in, doesn't know really what police work is except for what they got at school. Mm. Maybe they did a 3-month internship. Maybe they didn't. Most don't. But they get here and they're kind of thrown into the wolves. They don't know what the trauma that is involved in everyday policing. So with this, we get them to basically, it's an early intervention. They get data and health focused right away. It helps with, burnout because they know what they're getting into. They're already, we just had our mental health clinician here last week. Every one of them met with the mental health clinician. So when they get hired here as a police officer from an apprentice, it's not going to be anything new to meet with the mental health clinician. That's just, I bet, they've been doing it for the last 3 years.
Mm.
They've also been slowly introduced to all the different things the officers are dealing with. They also we have a drone as a first responder. It's mounted on the roof of our fire station. We can drop a pin on a map and the box opens up and the drone flies out. They control that. So these 18, 19-year-old apprentices are flying these drones for the officers, getting there to the calls ahead of them. They're able to call them on the radio, tell them what's going on. So we're introducing them to all of this at a slower pace. And I think that's probably going to, hopefully in the long run, we'll see more longevity with them. Just talking to we have a psychiatrist that does our psychological testing, and we've went back and forth with the testing process because we've been losing a lot of people that don't have a deep background in any type of real world experience unless they're coming from the military. And when I went through this whole program with the psychiatrists, they're like looking at it and thinking, well, I think they're going to do better than a normal recruit off the street because they've already been introduced to police life at a slower pace, where they're making connections with officers, they're feeling more comfortable. And so once they go through the academy and come back, they shouldn't have that hurdle to jump through that a lot of people do.
Wow, that is so cool. I've never heard that before. I've interviewed over 300 chiefs and I've never heard anything like this before. So there are a few things I wanted to ask you and kind of touch on. But one, it sounds to me like what you're doing is setting realistic expectations early. You're supporting long-term wellness early. And my question for you is just kind of in the nitty gritty, are these, when they are ready to then be hired full time after graduation and be an officer within the agency, are they committed to you guys? Is it like in the contract that they have to stay with you guys for a certain period of time since you are vested in them? Or how does that work?
No, I've actually been asked that by several police chiefs. We don't have that. We don't have a clawback either, that if they leave, they have to pay back the college that we paid. We're betting on the outcome on this one.
Yeah.
We have our first apprentice turning 21 in December. We are hoping to send him to the academy in January. So he'll be our first test trial on how that goes. We're pretty excited about it. They're all really good. They went through, like I said, we went through 60 kids to get here, to get our 7. But I think it's really going to work out well. And really, it's invest early instead of like fixing them later is really what the motto is on that one.
Yeah, I love that. How do you think that this model is going to impact the future of recruitment and retention? Do you have any ideas on how you think that this is going to progress long term?
Yeah, I'm hoping that this is going to be a staple where we're not going to have to do police testing quite as much,
Yeah.
and that we can really hire from this group of local students, local residents, that are from either Gurnee or the surrounding area that really see what we're putting into them. But it kind of, I mean, there's a lot of growing up. When we had the parents here, I was talking to them on their very first day, the parents and the kids. And normally you don't do that when you hire somebody for a police department job, right? You don't bring their parents in. But I thought it was important because some of these young adults are coming from jobs not quite as professional as a police department. So, telling them in front of their parents that no longer can your parents call you in sick because you just got out of high school. You're stepping into a very professional organization. And then when I told the parents all of the things that they get and all the things that we're going to do for the kids, as long as they do get a C or better and they're involved in our community programs here, basically they're slapping their sons and daughters in the back of the head and saying, don't screw this up.
Right.
So.
I did want to talk a little bit about the family involvement because I know that, obviously you talk to the parents, but I think you also told me offline that you also involve spouses at some point, and really try to, have those conversations with them about, signs and things to look out for. Do you think that that is something that organizations maybe miss and could do a better job is, having resources and conversations and maybe even training for families?
Yeah, I don't think we're doing a good enough job as it is.
Mm.
When we first get an officer here, whether they're a lateral or a new hire, we do bring their spouses in, and when they get hired on that first day, when they get sworn in, we have a conversation with them about wellness. One of our officers goes over. What their expectations are, what the academy is going to look like, everything from our new wellness app, how they have access to it. And then every 2 years, we do a thing where we bring in spouses and family members, and we do these resilient presentations. And it's still not enough. I don't know if we're going to get to enough. It's hard. It's hard to get involvement. Really, the onus is on myself getting that program going and getting it started. The, I think that really they're the main support behind all of this. Even whether the person's in the military or the person's in law enforcement, it's really the spouses and the families that are behind them. And you really need to get them on board. You need to get them to things to look out for and things to be aware of. So that way, if their spouse or significant other is going down a certain route, there's signs that they can see. And, how should they deal with it? We still look at how officers are, whether they're at the job or whether they're home, if there's indicators, whether they're struggling at work, whether they're bringing stuff from home into work. It's important. And for me, it's especially important. I've dealt with a lot of it between law enforcement and the military. When I was a first sergeant, I had a soldier that committed suicide, and it was pretty horrendous. And it kind of spreads almost like a virus because now everyone is down and upset and sad and really they're mourning that person, and then they think about all the things in their life, and really that can spread to other people, like those thoughts. It seems like that when I had dealt with this back in 2012 in the military, that I had it was almost an epidemic. And I don't know what it was during that time, but I got a million calls in the middle of the night for soldiers looking to talk to somebody, whether it was somebody in Milwaukee or somebody locally down in the Chicagoland area. And so it's very important that we get the families on board, and we get the officers, that whatever they're going through, to make sure that they have the resources they need.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you being humble enough to say, like, hey, I think we could do a better job, and we recognize the importance of this, and we're going to strive to continue to do the best that we can, and to do that. And I resonate so much more with people who say, like, I could do better and I want to do better, than someone who's like, I'm perfect, because we know that none of us are perfect. But having these conversations about how can we continue to grow, how can we continue to prioritize people, how can we continue to provide the resources that are going to help, I think is, for me, I think it starts with that. It starts with having the conversations about it. And I think conversations can save lives because it creates a space where action can be taken. So thank you for sharing that. As a leader, so you were a leader within the Army. Obviously, you're a leader within law enforcement. What was the best, maybe, leadership advice that you've either learned or that was given to you along the way?
Mm. I think it's really that it's never about me. It's always about the officer. It's always about, if you're in a military unit, it's about the soldier. Um, it- when I was talking about that soldier that committed suicide, and then I was in for 22 years, and while I was the first sergeant, I made sure that people could reach out at any time. And I had one person reach out to me. I had many people reach out, but I had one person in particular reach out to me one night. And I told them, just, if you want to just call in the middle of the night and talk, let's do it. And so, surprisingly, most people you would think wouldn't take that up because they were ashamed or for whatever reason. But I had several that did. And this one called me up. We had a good conversation. And then fast forward, I don't know, probably 5 years ago, I talked to them just through text message. and they thanked me for taking their call and talking to them that night. So I don't really know what would have happened if I didn't, but you know, for me, I do it for the moments, and that was one of the moments.
Yeah. Wow. I think that we all hope that we can have an impact that's meaningful and that we can look back on our careers and be proud of what we did and the impact we had on people's lives. And I think at the end of the day, all of these conversations that we have about wellness and leadership, it's about the people. It's about how can we take care of each other? Like how can we show up for each other and how can we support each other and how can we create a space where we all want each other to win? And I think that sometimes, and I'm guilty of this, sometimes you get lost in the grind in the day to day, and sometimes we forget to check in on each other and we forget to even look up. Sometimes we're so like in the trenches of what we're doing. And my hope is that through these conversations, it's a really powerful reminder for us daily to try to check in on with each other, look each other in the eye, like be there for each other and understand that, we don't all have to be best friends all the time, but we should all want each other to win. We should all want each other to be well and to get to the end of your career with quality of life left in you and to be able to enjoy your family and the fruits of your labor when you do eventually retire. And so I think that sometimes we forget that. And I am guilty of that even in my personal life. Sometimes I forget to like check in on my loved ones and just be like, how are you? Like how are things going? And so I'm hoping that this conversation is a reminder to anyone who's listening to take the time, and to make sure that people know that they're seen and they're supported and that they have people in their corner.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that a lot of leaders forget is that we have to model it. Right. We can't just talk about it and say you need to talk to people or say that, you need to talk to a mental health clinician or you need to check up on people because, culture isn't what we say. It's really what we tolerate and what we model. Mm-hmm. So if you're not modeling it, then it's not going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a really big fan of action. And and I've said this before on the podcast, I think there's 3 steps to positive change and long-term impact. And the first one is awareness. The second one is education. The third one is action. And so, one, having awareness around these things, that these things should happen, or maybe awareness around a challenge or an issue. The second one is education. What are those things that we can do to have a positive impact? What are those things that can be done? But then the third one, and the most important to your point of what you said, is there has to be action behind these conversations. Otherwise, and I call it the cotton candy effect, otherwise like it looks really pretty, it's like hot pink, cotton candy looks great. And then you dive into it and it kind of dissolves and there's no substance behind it. And we have to have that substance. We have to have that action between for the things that we're talking about. So I'm a really big fan of action-oriented conversations.
Yeah, I agree.
My final question for you is for that younger generation who are coming into the profession today. And we know that eventually they're going to be tomorrow's leaders. What words of wisdom would you share with them? Maybe something that you wish you would have known when you were first starting out, or something that's helped you along the way that you want to pass on to them.
Sure. I think it would be focus on becoming, not arriving. Through my success in my careers in the different positions, it was really about, really about who you become along the way, not the titles that you get or the positions or specialties. Because at the end of the day, you're not going to have the specialties, you're not going to have the titles. It's just who you are. So you need to work on yourself, and you need to model that.
I love that. Focus on becoming, not arriving. That is great. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time today and coming on here and talking to me about leadership and wellness. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Paige.
Of course.